The street is a mosaic of life. You see all kinds, all colors, all classes. You enter the stream and you're swept along, and you can hear what people are saying, and you can feel their human energy, and you can watch their behavior. The street, the definition of the street for me is the public. We have the private, all of us in our homes, and we go out onto the street as as a culture, and we behave on the street as the culture of the moment. Anyone who can look, has an opportunity to witness the struggles, the meaning, the politics. The social forces are visible on the street.
My father is a butcher. My mother cuts the meat. And I'm a little meatball that rolls around the street.
I was born in the Bronx, which is the northern part of New York, and in a kind of working class neighborhood, mostly poor, blue-collar people. But it was a very interesting life I had there. So we were always out in the street, and on my block, there were more than 2,000 people lived on my street. So there were huge groups of kids that played together. And so we were out in the street all the time. It was really street life. My father was a truck driver and later was a salesman. And he was a real mentor to me. Besides my father, he showed me a way to look at the world and to understand life around me. Wherever we went, he would say, look at that. Look at the difference between that. Or watch this. Something's going to happen. He taught me, most importantly, how to pay attention to the world, not to be in a dream all the time. Perhaps because I was a dreamer as a child. But he helped me to see the way the world worked. And that kind of interest in the way the world showed itself probably was what led me to be a photographer in later years, although I didn't know it as a child. The mix of what's on the street and what was on the street and might be on the street in the future are all there for you if you're capable of reading it. Because the street is a text. It's an invisible text. And if you are a reader, curious reader, you'll be able to make some sense of it.
Have a good time in New York City. Everybody comes, everybody has fun. Nobody has to run. Watch out there now. Keep hope alive, multiply. 1 and 1 is 2, that means me and you, baby. And it's on to the break of dawn. I'm Willie Glass, a flash from the past, knows all about that ass. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
That's gonna be funny.
I think it was the golden age. In the early 60s, there was an innocence on the street. People couldn't imagine that you would be taking their picture. They would look over their shoulder to see if there was something behind them that you were photographing. It was before we had the idea that fame is something that everybody should have. That's the time today. Everybody wants to be famous. for something. You know, they don't have to earn their fame. They just want to be famous, you know, some selfie, something that they'll post on the internet. But in the 60s, there was an innocence that they couldn't imagine that you would be taking their picture. So photographers had a camouflage, and the camouflage came out of a kind of group innocence. And you could work on the streets, even if you learned Bresson's strategy to be invisible. Even if you weren't invisible, you could still make pictures and people wouldn't threaten you or be fearful. It just was, you know, oh, you're a photographer. Oh, it's okay, you know, it's all right.
No.
To be out like a flaneur, to just be out on the street as free of thought as possible. I walk along and something says to me, stop. Stop right here. That life is full of unexpected wonders, being human, of having a humanist philosophy, and they come out of ordinary, everyday things. But you have to be clear and focused and conscious so that you could see them, because they only happen for a moment, you know?
Imagination is funny. It makes a cloudy day sunny.
Paris est la ville du monde où l'on rêve le plus. C'est à Paris, en effet, que l'on trouve le plus de ces lieux de hasard, de rendez-vous, d'habitude ou de rencontres, dont quelques-uns, dépassant leur fonction primitive, ont acquis une célébrité mondiale.
I arrived in Paris in 1966. The tempo was energetic, but more relaxed than New York. There was the cafe life, the street life, and it was much more at ease. There was a great sense of style. I loved the women. I just thought the women were fantastic, and that you could make a kind of eye contact. I remember feeling that the waiters in the cafe, they were doing their job. They were waiters, that was their life. And there was a certain pride. And I saw it in the butchers, and I saw it in the fishmongers, and I saw it in the fruit sellers in the market. Everybody seemed to have a kind of dignity and care for their little piece of territory. I can't say that I could photograph that, but it certainly affected my sense of what was important to consider about French life, a certain attitude. In America, there's so much ambition that everybody wants to jump out of where they are. Oh, I'm only doing this temporarily. I want to be rich. You know, so there was a feeling of not having dignity or pride. And I definitely remember feeling that in France, in Paris. For the first time, I had a sense that these people, you know, have been through a lot and they've suffered. And sure, there's a lot of political turmoil between the left and the right and the communists and the socialists. And that's inherent in the dialogue. But there was a pride in the way the people lived their lives. I didn't understand it until I returned to America a year later, and I suddenly saw America in a very different way.
Jamais encore une manifestation de cette ampleur contre la guerre au Vietnam n'avait eu lieu à New York. La foule qui se dirigeait vers l'édifice des Nations Unies était estimée à 125 000 personnes. La police avait été mise en état d'alerte car on craignait les plus graves incidents. La protestation a eu cependant un caractère très spectaculaire. Le pasteur Martin Luther King a prononcé un discours et a été autorisé à transmettre une pétition à M. Ralph Bunche.
The worst race riots since those 2 years ago in the Watts section of Los Angeles rocked New Jersey's largest city, Newark, for 5 consecutive days and nights. At least 24 persons are killed. More than 1,800 wounded, some 1,400 arrested.
We had seen, you know, pictures of the death of Kennedy, of Martin Luther King. We have seen peace marches in the South. We had seen water cannons being sprayed on young black kids and blowing them over. We saw these images which showed the kind of racism of Americans against other Americans. And those images were powerful. And it didn't matter if they were made as works of art by individual photographers or if they were made as documents by photojournalists. Pictures were powerful, and they brought the racial question right up to the front, and it pushed everybody's face in it, as did pictures of war protests and pictures coming back from Vietnam of soldiers who were blown to bits.
End the war in Vietnam. Bring the troops home now. End the war in Vietnam. Bring the troops home now. End the war in Vietnam.
I certainly attended almost every protest rally that I could, and I was out on the streets. It was a very strong time to photograph a kind of convulsion in the society, you know, a real division in the society, anti-war versus people who, you know, whose heads were in another place.
Victory now! Victory now! Victory now! Victory now! Victory now! Victory now! Victory now!
At that time, I applied for a Guggenheim Foundation grant. I wanted to see how Americans were using their free time while at the same time we were at war in Vietnam and 50,000 young American soldiers were killed and God knows how many were injured. And yet people were living their lives, they were shopping, they were doing foolish things, foolish American Disneyland games while the war was going on there. There was this huge disconnect.
We have endured a week such as no nation should live through, a time of violence and tragedy.
Go!
I think the President of the United States played politics in a period of tragedy and riot.
Hell no, no, hell no, no,
These are the sounds and voices of a year, as WKNR News presents an electronic diary. A year marked by rioting, by a continuing war and growing protest, by a rise in crime and cost, and by tragedy and triumph.
Just like there is in America today, where the police shoot innocent black men on the street or in their car. So those kinds of events happened in the 60s too, and people in Harlem or in, Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, people rioted. There was a lot of anger. I always thought it was important to witness this moment in history, because obviously it was a turning point. Although most of the American public didn't get it, it was clear that this is changing. The times, they're changing. Bobby Dylan saying, right, the times they are changing.
More than just a new year, 1970 brought a new decade. Many of the problems of the 60s followed us into the decade, and the new year added new problems.
Swap shop.
The Vietnam protests gave a sense of power to the people. And the issues around segregation gave a sense of black power. There was a feeling of hope that America was on a path where young people could actually bring the government to stopping the war in Vietnam. Their voice was heard, not just by the vote, but by the public outcry of it.
C'est la première grande manifestation féministe qui se tient à Paris depuis 1936. Environ 2000 femmes, souvent jeunes, quelquefois plus âgées, défilent de la République à la Nation à l'appel du MLF, le mouvement de libération de la femme. Mot d'ordre central, briser, je cite, les chaînes de l'esclavage qui depuis toujours réduisent à une condition inférieure la femme. Cette marche est internationale puisque des manifestations semblables se déroulent aujourd'hui aux États-Unis, au Canada, en Italie et en Allemagne.
Gay Pride, Gay Liberation, traduisons, soyons fiers d'en être, libérons-nous. Soyons fiers d'en être, homosexuels. Cette manifestation se déroule à New York, ville où l'on en a vu d'autres. Ailleurs en Amérique, il faut bien le dire, elle ferait scandale. À leur manière, les homosexuels américains réclament ce que réclament beaucoup de minorités américaines, être intégrés tout en affichant sa différence. Inutile d'ajouter que la majorité silencieuse qui soutient le président Nixon contemple à la télévision ce genre de manifestation d'un œil rond.
New York came out of the war into a very prosperous period. A lot of money was being made. The middle class was growing. There was a sense of their own power, and people could express themselves. There was the sense that you could air your views. Witness feminism and gay rights and abortion and these issues, the segregation issues. I mean, a sense of freedom and a spirit for freedom was happening. Fashion changes with every decade, and certainly the fashions of the 70s were really ugly. When you think about it today, the collars were very wide, men's shirts had lots of flowers and flower power, lots of design to it. The pants were very often strange kind of brown or green, really horrible colors with wide legs. Not beautiful bell bottoms, but just a kind of awkward proportion to them. And so as a photographer on the street, it was interesting to see a kind of men's fashion showing up in a very different way when you compare it to the men's business suits. It's not that I'm interested in fashion, because it's not something I follow. But when you're out on the streets, you begin to see the repeat over and over again, and it becomes a way of measuring your time. And around 1971, I thought to myself, I'm finished with black and white. I'm not going to shoot it anymore. It doesn't call me. The world is too interesting in color because it related to the world. And I began to understand something about the emotional quality of color. Why do people choose this particular color? Why do they put this on their lips? Why do they wear, a certain kind of hat? Or people make selections because they project themselves through color. They may remember their mother's apron and how it felt. They might remember the little blanket they had when they were a baby and how comforting it was. So there's a lot of psychology with color. So I wanted to learn how to work in color in a way that would be as powerful as black and white. I had to find a new way of working on the street. Because before, black and white or color, it didn't matter. I would wait for an incident to happen. I was always looking for a small event as the starting point for the picture. So I found that what I needed to do was to step back from the normal plane of focus that I worked in. And in that way, I would engage the entire space of the street, all the way up Fifth Avenue, because I felt that I wanted to photograph everything in the frame, not just an incident. And so I began to see a pattern in the photographs that I could now look there, and I began to have a new kind of consciousness. And I thought, well, if information is what photography is about, then I want as much information as I could pack into the frame. Color information, human activity information, spatial information, the density of life in a big city, the look of the clothing, the feel of the traffic in the street. I wanted to see if I could say, this is my time, and this is what it looks like, chaotic and interconnected.
All the greatest piece of artwork of the 1960s.
I think that the oil crisis and the different market failures were part of the reality, and trying to react to that as an artist means trying to find a way to comment on it photographically. There were a number of interesting artists who were painting all over the walls, in the subways and on the sides of buildings, in empty buildings in Soho. It wasn't that interesting to me to photograph because it already exists as somebody's work. And the graffiti, I felt, was disruptive. I didn't like the feeling of all the trains going by with the graffiti on. I felt like there's enough chaos in New York that to add this kind of egotism, my name big, on a subway train, made it, in a way, more chaotic and noisier. We all thought of it as a kind of outcry, a public outcry from the youth of the ghettos saying, "Listen to me, listen to me." You know, it was their power, in a way, a call from the neighborhoods, from the banlieue to the center, saying, "Look what we can do," you know. It was effective. It was effective. It got people's attention, and it angered a lot of people, and it pleased a lot of people. So in a way, it was a divisive art form. And in the case of Basquiat, someone was able to leap from doing that on the street to taking it into a studio and to having an expansion of the work. I don't think I was in a position by the 80s to be the same kind of commentator I was in the 70s, because something happened. I had a kind of revelation, as if I had two personalities. I had the jazz musician shooting on the street, and I had a classical musician standing in front of nature. Very different tempo. So I moved to Cape Cod in the summer because I knew it had good street life, but it also had beautiful light. And it would be a place for my children to play by the water. It was a life-changing decision for me. The small camera is click, 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 click. The big camera is, put it down, open it up, go under the hood, look at it. And I understood that this is possible, that I can develop a kind of meditative side where I could stand in front of nature or the light, just the light itself, and get lost in it. Let myself be taken in by the space and make a picture about this kind of time. New York, by the 90s, the very first phase of the computer revolution was happening. And that brought a different mentality, a different energy to the street. For instance, in the years that I did advertising, the agencies would call me up, I would go in, we would discuss an advertising campaign. They used my experience and my skill to create a brand image, and I would go out and do it. In the 90s, when computers started to really become powerful, the earliest days of Photoshop were used to kind of make fantasies. And so photography in the public, in advertising, didn't look like reality. In the 70s, I didn't get a sense of a prophecy about a future. There's more projection today. When I walk the streets today and I see everybody looking at their phones instead of looking at the world, I see a bleak future where people are separated and they're all self-involved. And there's a kind of egotism in making selfies. And I see something changing. I was on Cape Cod on September 11th, 2001. It was an incredibly perfect, pure day. I was out. I had left home at about 5:30 in the morning, and I was out photographing early, and I was thinking to myself, it's such a beautiful, peaceful day. My wife called me and said, "Get to a television as soon as possible. Something terrible has happened in New York." And I found a motel nearby, and I went in, and they were all watching the television. And I stood and watched with them, and I saw the second plane hit. I lived within walking distance of the Twin Towers. So it was my neighborhood. And as soon as I could go back, we drove to New York, and I got out on the street with my Leica, and I walked down to Ground Zero. And the smell in the air, the smoke rising, and the wind blowing the poisonous smells of all the things that were burning. And I walked all the way down to the point where they had built a cyclone fence, and they covered the fence with tarpaulins so that you couldn't see in. And at a certain moment, I pick up my Leica, and I'm looking through it just to see. And as soon as I did that, somebody punched me on my back like that. And I turned around, and it was a woman cop. And she's in my face, and she says, "No photographs, buddy. This is a crime scene." And really, like, like that. And I said, wait a second. What are you talking about? This is a crime scene. This is the street. That's the crime scene. I'm a citizen. I can take a picture on the street because I have the rights of the First Amendment. And you can't tell me no photographs. And she said, "Mayor Giuliani says all photographs are forbidden." And in that moment, I thought, I came back to New York so I could help. What can I do? No photography allowed. The press can't take pictures. Who is going to make the history of what's going on in there? And I called the Museum of the City of New York, a history museum. I said, and I propose that I will find a way in, you'll help me, and I will give you the archive for the City of New York. He said, my God, what a fantastic idea. He said, I know Mayor Giuliani. I'll talk to him about it. Well, he talked. He couldn't get the mayor to agree. And I thought, this guy's hopeless. He's just a hopeless administrator. So I started thinking, who do I know? Who do I know in government? And I remembered that a young guy whose father I knew was now the commissioner of Manhattan's parks. So I called him up and I said, Adrian, it's me, Joel Meyerowitz. Listen, I have an idea. And I explained the idea to him. And I said, I need to know someone in government who can help me. And Adrian said, I am the government. I said, what are you going to do for me? He said, come to my house tonight. I'm going to give you a pass. The very first time, when that guy left me there on the very first day, and I had no hat or anything, and I stood there and I looked around me, I started to cry. I just was crying. I couldn't even stand. My legs were shaking because I was in it. I was in it. And I think, this is dangerous. And I look around and I see someone had put their hard hat on the nail. So I walk over and I look around, nobody's there, and I pick up the hard hat and I turn it around and it says NYPD, New York Police Department. I put it on. And then I found like the back of a truck and they were giving that stuff out to the workers. So I just stood in line and I got my gloves and I got my glasses and I got my vest and everything. And within 20 minutes, I looked like I belonged there. And then some cop comes to me and says, no photographs here, buddy. You know, the mayor says no photographs allowed. You can't photograph in here. I showed him my badge. I'm working for the museum. I'm the history photographer for the museum. The guy said, I don't give a fuck what you are, buddy. Get out of here. And I said, I'm working for you, for history. He said, not on my watch. Get out of here. So I had to leave. But I went around, I walked all the way around, and I found another place, and I showed my badge, and I went in, and then another cop threw me out. And it happened again and again and again. But I kept going. And I saw that I needed to go up. There were 11 policemen, and they were sitting exactly where I needed to go. I set the camera up, and I said, I gotta tell you, I'm the history photographer. You're the first cops that I've met who haven't told me to get the fuck out of here. And they said, oh no, man. He said, we need this history for our children and our grandchildren, and fuck Mayor Giuliani. We're gonna protect you. And it was like that every day. I was in there 9 months. It felt like I was a young man all over again, as if I was the same passionate photographer who came onto the streets in 1962 and put color in my camera and wanted to look at everything. I was on fire. I felt like I was inventing myself all over again as a historian, as a record keeper, as an artist. So it was a very powerful, experience, yeah. After September 11th, the streets are, certainly for a year or so, they were very different. People were different. They were still reacting to the shock of the attack. I think for a few years like that. And now, you know, this is already 15 years ago. It's the past, it's history. People come back and they live their lives, and you know, they live on the street almost the same way, except there are changes, right? We're a little more watchful of the way people behave. People are on guard, and it's a mixture, you know. It doesn't have the sweetness of the past, the innocence of the past. Once a country is attacked, you're no longer innocent, you know? Once you have events like you have in Paris, you're no longer so innocent. You're on guard now, right? You're watching, because you could be there at the moment that somebody decides to detonate a bomb. So, yeah, it's moved on. The streets have moved on to a 21st century way of living. "50 years ago, I didn't know anything about photography. Harry was a painter himself, and one day he asked me to design a small booklet. And then Harry hired Robert Frank to shoot the photographs. So I went down to the location where the shoot was going to be. He was moving and shooting, and I saw his physicality. And I thought, how strange. I didn't know that you could move and take photographs. And each time I heard his Leica click, I would see a moment where something was happening in front of his camera. And after 2 hours, the shoot was over. I went out on the street, and everything on the street was happening, and I could mentally say, click, click, click. I was freezing everything, and all along Fifth Avenue, I was watching everything. So I went up to the office, and Harry said, "How is the shoot?" I said, "Oh, "It was great, Harry. I'm quitting." And he said, "Oh, was it that bad?" I said, "No, it was great, but I have to be a photographer. What he did taught me that I'm a photographer." And I said, I got to be out on the street. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you have a camera?" And I said, "No, I don't have a camera." And he said, "Schmuck, you need a camera." And he opened his drawer and he took out his Pentax and he said, "Here, learn to use this. And when you're finished with it, give it back to me and you get your own camera." For me, when I got up, I would have breakfast, I'd put on my camera and I would say, "I'm going out to the street to see what happens." Because the street, you're never bored on the street. If you have a camera and you go to it, you will get everything that you cannot expect or anticipate. It will happen to you. If you're sitting at home saying, "I don't know what to do with myself," nothing will happen to you. So I've never been bored because I just pick up a camera and go. I go for a walk in the world. And the world gives me its gifts only because I pay attention to it. It has taught me how to pay attention and how to be ready so that when the song comes, I can hear it. And to me, that's the secret of photography, is just to be out in the world at large with your eyes wide open, your mind fresh, and wait to see what writes on you.